I never meant to build a home with hands that won't stop shaking, and I never meant to let a man die for a woman like me. Snow hammered the half-finished cabin the night everything fell apart. She stood there, May, heavy with child, breath fogging in the cold, trying to brace the last support beam before the storm ripped it clean off the frame. And somewhere miles below that ridge, Rhett Lawson was already fighting his way back through the blizzard, carrying a truth he should have said years earlier, and a wound he wouldn't survive if snow had been falling all afternoon, the slow, steady kind that filled the quiet without asking permission. By the time the last light bled out behind the pines, the clearing was nothing but white ground, dark trees, and the crooked ribs of a half-built cabin with one woman still working under it. May Callahan braced her boots in the drift and shoved her shoulder under a fresh-cut beam, breath fogging in the December air. Her belly pressed against the wood, round and high beneath a coat that no longer buttoned. Her back trembled. "Just one more," she muttered. "Just one more, Lord, and I'll stop. You hear me?" The Lord might have heard, but the log didn't care. It slid on the frosted sawhorse, nudged by wind. When May heaved, her boot hit ice. For a heartbeat, she was weightless. Then the beam rolled, all that frozen weight tipping straight toward her. She didn't have time to scream. Instinct wrapped her arms around her stomach, not her head. Snow exploded around her knees as she dropped, bracing for bone and wood. Hoofbeats tore through the trees. A dark horse burst from the timber, breath blasting white. The rider was already out of the saddle when he reached her. He caught the far end of the beam with both hands, boots skidding, shoulders bunching beneath his coat. The log slammed down short, missing May by inches, burying itself in the drift where she'd stood. Silence crashed in behind the echo of hoofbeats, broken only by their breathing and the thin whistle of wind through bare rafters. May stayed curled around her belly a second longer, heart pounding against her palms. Then she pushed up, snow clinging to her skirt, and glared at the man holding her beam like it weighed nothing. He was tall, broad through the chest, hat pulled low against the flakes. His coat was the kind a rancher wore who didn't have to count pennies, but his hands on the timber were roped with callus and old rope burns. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice low, touched with that Lawson drawl the valley knew too well. "You pick a mean night to wrestle lumber." She snatched her hammer from the snow, fingers stiff with cold. "I don't recall hiring help." He eased the beam upright, setting one end into the waiting notch of the frame. "Didn't wait to be hired. Saw that log fixin' to kill you." His gaze dropped to her coat, the way it stretched over her middle. "Would have taken 2 lives at once." The baby kicked hard as if agreeing. May tightened her jaw. "I'm fine." "You were about to be flattened," he said. "Fine ain't the word I'd use." "I said I'm fine." Her voice came out sharper than she meant, riding the edge of panic. "And this land is mine. If you're lost, follow your own tracks back out." The man tipped his hat a fraction. "Not lost. Just riding the south fence of Lawson land. Name's Rhett Lawson." He nodded toward the dark line of trees. "Ranch runs all the way to that creek. Didn't figure anybody was fool enough to build this close to the boundary in December." "I bought this acre fair," May shot back. "Signed paper at the courthouse in Willow Creek. Your fences can learn to live with it." He studied her a moment, snow dusting the rough stubble along his jaw. "Reckon they'll have to." His gaze slid to her cracked, raw-knuckled hands. Most folks wait till spring to raise a roof, especially folks in your condition. I don't have until spring. She turned her back on him, set hammer to nail with more force than sense. Wood splintered under the blow. There's a baby coming before the thaw. I'd like 4 walls and a roof between us and the snow when he gets here. He took a slow step closer, boots crunching, but left a long arm's length between them. You been at this since sunup? I've been at this since the day I stepped off the stagecoach, she snapped. And I'll still be at it tomorrow, with or without an audience. Truth is, she wanted to sag against that half-built wall and admit her legs shook with every swing. Rhett watched her drive another nail with stiff, stubborn blows. Most women in these parts don't do this kind of work, he said. Not on their own, not carrying. I didn't ride all the way from Boston to be most women. She heard it as soon as it left her mouth, so did he. His eyes narrowed just a breath, like a horse's ears flick when it catches a sound. Boston, huh? He nodded slowly, as if tucking that away with a dozen other things he already knew. Heard tell about a lady from back east come in on the stage. Town's small. Folks talk. They can talk themselves hoarse for all I care. She hit the nail again, bent it sideways, cursed, pried it out with her teeth clenched. Words never built a cabin. No, he agreed. Hands do. He shifted his grip on the beam. And your hands are about wrung out. Let me set this crosspiece at least. Consider it early Christmas help. Lord knows we all could use a little mercy this year. At the word Christmas, something pinched behind her ribs. Somewhere far off, church bells would be ringing, candles lit, choirs singing about peace on earth. Out here, all she had was snow and splinters. I don't take charity, she said. Not from loss and money. Not from any man again. He went quiet. Snow thickened between them, soft as ash. Well, he said at last, maybe call it payment on an old debt then. She froze. What debt? The one I took on, he said, eyes on the wood, not on her. The day I watched you walk up church steps on another man's arm and didn't stop you. Her grip on the hammer slipped. For half a second, a memory flashed. High ceiling, organ music, a young rancher standing at the back of a Boston church, hat twisting in big hands. I thought I imagined him, she told herself. Guess I didn't. You should go back to town, Mr. Lawson, she said, voice flat. Your fiancé'll be wondering why you're out chasing fallen women in the snow when you ought to be trimming a tree with her. His jaw tightened at fiancé, but he didn't argue. She knows where I am, he said. Or she will when folks tell her. Folks always tell. Then ride home fast, May said. Give him something proper to talk about. She yanked the beam from his hands, muscles screaming, and dragged it the last inch into place herself. Pain knifed down her side. She hissed through her teeth, refused to bend. Rhett watched her a long moment, snow piling on his shoulders, on the brim of his hat. Then he stepped back, palms open, as if surrendering the whole cursed clearing to her. All right, he said softly. You don't want my hands on this place, I'll keep 'em off. But I won't pretend I don't see a woman working herself into the grave 3 days before Christmas and ask no questions of the Almighty about it. He turned, swung back into the saddle with the easy grace of a man born to a horse, and nudged the bay toward the trees. The wind swallowed him quick, cloak and hat and horse melting into the dark. May stood there in the snow until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Only then did she look down and see the crescent of red the beam had crushed into the skin of her palm. I swore I'd never owe another man my life. She closed her fist over the blood and set the hammer to the next nail. The lamp sputtered twice before it gave up, leaving the cabin to the mercy of the hearth and the snow glow bleeding through the cracks. May sat on the edge of the narrow bed, boots still on, coat still buttoned as far as it would go over her belly. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from cold. She knew that kind of shake. This was the kind that started somewhere under the breastbone when you'd nearly died and hadn't had time to understand why you were still breathing. She unlaced her boots anyway, one stiff knot at a time, and let them drop to the packed dirt floor. Her toes burned as blood crept back in. The baby rolled, a slow push against her ribs, as if testing the walls. "I know," she whispered into the dim. "That fool almost dropped a tree on us. We're not thanking him for catching it." The wind pressed against the loose boards like a big hand testing for weakness. Snow dusted in along one seam. She got up with a soft groan, stuffed an old shirt into the gap, and checked the others. Every crack she plugged, 2 more showed themselves. "That's how sin works too," my father used to say. "Plug one hole, 3 more spring open." She went to the small trunk by the bed, lifted the lid. Inside lay her whole past, folded down to fit a box, a second dress, a worn Bible with her maiden name inked in the front, the leather pouch that held the last of her city money, and the envelope of papers she tried not to think about. May took the pouch first, weighing it in her hand. Coins clinked, thin and mean. Enough flour for another week, maybe. Nails, if the Lord was feeling generous. Then she picked up the envelope. Her name stared back at her in a Boston clerk's tidy hand, married name scrawled beneath like a stain that wouldn't wash out. She slid the papers free. The petition for divorce, the half-signed affidavit. Black ink argued with red stamps, one of them crooked, as if the clerk had gotten bored halfway through condemning her. "No decree," she murmured. "No clean break. Just half a sin hung on a hook." She thought of Rhett Lawson's face when he'd said Boston, the way his eyes had flicked, not surprised, just confirming. He knew. Maybe he'd always known. May folded the papers again, tighter this time, edges biting into her fingers, and shoved the envelope to the bottom of the trunk. She pulled the Bible out instead, thumbed it open blind. Her finger landed on a verse about a stable and a child laid in a manger because there was no room anywhere else. "Plenty of room out here," she muttered, "just short on roofs." Still, she let herself read the passage through, lips moving silently over words about angels and fear not and good tidings. When she closed the book, her hand rested a moment on her belly. "If you can find a stable," she said softly, "I can hammer 4 walls. Just don't let this be for nothing, Lord. Don't let him." She stopped herself, changed the prayer midstream. "Don't let us be for nothing." Snow hissed against the roof. Somewhere close, a coyote yipped, lonely and thin. She lay back on the mattress, one arm crooked over her eyes, the other cradling the weight of the child. She listened to the wind until it blurred into the thud of her own pulse. Sleep came not as a mercy, just as a collapse. Morning broke gray and bitter. The world outside was a quilt of white stitched with pine trunks and fence lines. Her breath smoked in her own cabin. May swung her legs over the side of the bed, bit down on a low groan as her back protested, and reached for her boots. Her fingers were clumsy as she laced them. The baby had settled low in the night. Every movement felt like walking with a stone cradled under her ribs. She shrugged into her coat, tied a scarf over her hair, and took the coin pouch from the trunk. It felt lighter than it had last night. Everything did in the morning until you picked it up and realized it hadn't grown any more strength while you slept. Outside, the snow came up to the tops of her boots. She hitched the old mare from the lean-to, patted its thin neck, and swung herself awkwardly into the saddle. "Town and back," she told the horse. "Nails, flour, salt, no gossip needed." The mare twitched an ear like it didn't believe her. The ride down off the ridge was slow. Ice hid under powder in the switchbacks, and more than once May had to lean into the turn, jaw clenched, as the mare slid a step and caught itself. By the time the road leveled out and the rooftops of Willow Creek showed ahead, her hands were numb on the reins. Willow Creek wasn't much. 2 muddy streets, a scattering of houses, a church with a bell that rang louder than its congregation, and the Klein's general store sitting square on the corner like a judge watching over the rest. She tied the mare to the rail out front, ignoring the sideways looks from a pair of freighters loading sacks into a wagon. Her boots thumped the porch. The bell over the store door jangled as she pushed it open. Warmth hit her first, then the smell of kerosene, flour, and peppermint sticks laid out in a jar by the counter, early Christmas stock. Marta Klein glanced up from behind the ledger. Finn was stacking canned peaches on a low shelf. Both of them paused just a heartbeat too long before their faces pulled into polite shapes. "Morning, Miss Callahan," Marta said. Her voice was friendly enough, but her eyes skipped to May's belly and stuck there half a second. "Morning," May answered, tugging her gloves off finger by finger. "Need a 50-pound sack of flour, 2 pounds of nails, salt if you've got it. Maybe a tin of molasses if the price didn't go up overnight." Finn wiped his hands on his apron, came around the end of the shelf. "Molasses is dear this winter," he said. "Freight from back east got held up. But we'll see what we can do." He brushed past 2 ranch wives in bonnets and wool cloaks. They leaned in toward each other as he passed. "That's her?" one whispered. "The one set up on the South Ridge?" "Boston lady," the other murmured. "Husband gone. Belly full and no ring." May kept her eyes on the list nailed to the wall, but her jaw set. She heard every word. Everybody always did in a town this small. She stepped aside to let Finn haul the flour sack past her. As he did, his shoulder almost touched hers, then didn't. The space between them was the width of a rumor. "Prices are marked," she said tightly. "I can read." "Didn't say you couldn't." Finn offered a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just trying to help." Marta came out from behind the counter with a tin of molasses in hand. "We can only do cash today, Miss Callahan," she said, setting it down with a soft clink. "Order from the wholesaler came in higher than we thought. Can't keep running a tab right now." May's head snapped up. "I've never asked you to." "You've let a week slide now and then," Marta said carefully. "We didn't mind. Just times being what they are. Times being what they are meant. You're trouble now, and we can't afford to be seen too close." May nodded once, sharp. "Cash is all I got anyway." She loosened the pouch strings and counted out coins onto the counter. aware of the women behind her going silent to listen to the small clinks. When she was done, only a few dull pieces lay in the bottom of the pouch. Marta scooped the money, made change 1 coin at a time, then hesitated. "You all right up there alone?" she asked, almost in spite of herself. "Winter coming on fast. Pastor says this storm's just a taste." "I'm building as fast as I can," May said. "Lord willing, there'll be 4 walls before the next one." "Lord willing," Finn echoed, but he didn't sound like he was betting his store on it. May gathered the bundle of nails, the salt, the tin, and nodded her thanks. She walked toward the door, feeling the weight of 3 different kinds of eyes on her: pity, curiosity, judgment. When she pushed the door open, the bell gave its little merry jangle. The cold rushed in to meet her. Across the street, a bay horse stood tied to the post outside the livery, dark against the snow. Its rider leaned against the hitch rail, hat low, collar turned up. He didn't come over, didn't call her name. He only touched 2 fingers to the brim in a small, respectful nod. Rhett Lawson. For half a breath, May considered pretending she hadn't seen. It would have been easier. Instead, she lifted her chin and gave him the smallest nod back, then stepped off the boardwalk and into the hard, bright cold. If the Lord was watching, he knew this much. Roofs were expensive, but pride cost more. By the time May reached the ridge again, the sky had dropped low enough to brush the treetops. Snow sifted down in a fine, constant curtain, muting the world to hoofbeats and the old mare's breath. Her fingers had cramped around the reins. She peeled them loose one by one as she slid out of the saddle, boots sinking into the drift in front of the cabin. The logs loomed darker against the white, a skeleton of a home waiting for flesh. Something else waited too. A small shape sat on the top step, half buried, square, wrapped in checkered cloth. May stopped dead. The mare shook its head, sending ice down onto her shoulder. She didn't move. There'd been nothing there when she rode out at first light. Out here, nothing walked past by accident. You had to mean it. She untied the mare with slow fingers, led it under the lean-to, then came back to the step. For a long breath, she just looked at the bundle. Snow had piled along one side of it, outlining the edges. No tracks showed on the path anymore. The fresh fall had covered them. "That's not how this works," she said under her breath. "You don't get surprises on the edge of the world." Still, she bent and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. Warm, faintly, like it hadn't been sitting long. She carried it inside, hip bumping the door shut, and set it on the table beside the cold stove. Her knife made quick work of the knot. The cloth fell open. Inside lay 3 small things that made her throat tighten. A length of soft flannel, pale yellow, a bundle of nails tied with twine, and a tin wrapped in paper that smelled of ginger and mint the moment she cracked it open. Baby cloth, nails, tea. On top of the flannel sat a scrap of folded paper. She didn't want to open it. Of course she opened it. 2 letters, RL in a hand that tried to be neat and almost managed it. No message, no scripture, no lecture. Just initials, as if the rest were obvious. "Coward," she muttered, though she wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. "If you're going to buy me mercy, at least have the gall to knock on the door." The baby nudged under her ribs, little heel pressing against her palm where it rested on her belly. "Don't you dare take his side," she thought. "We don't need any Lawsons in this house." The kettle, empty and useless, sat on the back of the stove. She stared at the tea leaves in her hand, their sharp, clean smell cutting through the heavier scents of smoke and damp wool. I said I wouldn't take charity again. Not from city men, not from ranch money, not from anyone. She poured the leaves into the kettle anyway. By the time the fire caught and the water started to steam, the cabin had warmed enough for her breath to fade. She wrapped the yellow flannel around her shoulders just to feel its softness, then yanked it off again and laid it flat on the table. It looked like a promise she hadn't earned. The tea burned a sweet heat down her throat. It eased a knot behind her eyes she hadn't realized had been there for days. The baby settled lower, the churning in her stomach calming with it. "Fine," she said to the empty room. "We'll drink this one and then we're square. Him and me and every fool thing between." The wind answered, rattling the shutter. No angels sang. No booming voice corrected her theology. Just snow and fire and the slow tick of cooling iron. Afternoon blurred into work. There were always more logs to drag, more joints to notch, more ways to learn that wood didn't care who you'd been in Boston. It only cared if you held the saw steady. May braced one boot against a log and pulled, teeth clenched, hands burning. Each foot she moved, it felt like a mile. A shadow slid across the snow beside her before she heard the horse. She straightened, breath coming hard, and turned. Rhett Lawson sat a little bent in the saddle, as if he'd been riding a long way or a long time, she couldn't tell. His coat was unbuttoned at the throat. Snow clung to the dark hair at his temples, melting in slow drops. He swung down without waiting for permission, led the bay forward a few steps, then let the reins drop. The horse snorted and shook itself, more steam than breath in the cold air. "I told you," May said, words white in front of her face. "I didn't hire help." "Good thing I ain't asking for wages," he answered. His eyes flicked to the log at her feet, the unfinished span of roof above. "Storm's coming faster than they thought. That ridge'll be a wind tunnel by nightfall. I know what wind feels like." "Do you know what it'll do to a half-framed roof?" he asked. "Or do I have to sit my hat on a grave and explain I watched you get buried twice?" She picked up the handsaw, jaw tight. "You don't get to talk about my grave, Mr. Lawson." He watched her make the first cut. The blade jumped, bit, skittered. Her arms shook by the time she made a shallow groove. She adjusted her stance, started again. Rhett stepped around the log, out of reach, but close enough that his voice didn't have to raise much. "We could make an agreement. I don't make deals with men who leave things on my doorstep and ride off." His mouth quirked the smallest fraction. "You drank the tea?" She refused to give him that. He nodded at the log instead. "Let me take the heavy end. You do the hammering and tell me where to put it. No more. No less." "And what makes you think I need your hands?" "Nothing. I can see it." He shrugged. "I figure the Lord gave me a back still in working order and more daylight than I deserve. Might as well use both where they count." "Don't bring the Lord into this," she snapped. "He and I got our own arrangement." "He and I do too," Rhett said quietly. "Maybe this is it." Silence stretched, thin as ice. Finally, May jerked her chin toward the stack of lumber. "You touch anything inside my cabin without being asked, I'll brain you with that hammer." "That's fair," he said. "You got my word I won't cross that threshold, lest you say so. Outside's different." He moved to the far end of the log, wrapped both hands around it, and lifted. The veins stood out in his forearms, His breath shortened, but the log came up smooth. He set it onto the sawhorse in one practiced swing. She hated the way relief washed through her shoulders. They worked without talking for a while. He lifted, braced, held. She measured, cut, drove nails. The rhythm found them before they chose it. Once, when she bent to reach for a dropped nail, the chain around her neck slipped free of her collar. The ring slid out, catching a pale bit of winter light. Rhett's eyes caught it and stilled. For a heartbeat, he didn't look away. Then he did, fast, like a man looking into the sun too long. "Boston looks small from out here," he said after a while, voice almost casual. "All that polish and paper shrinks right down to ink on a page." She shoved the ring back under her dress. "Ink's what decides if I'm a wife or a runaway. Out here or in Boston, that don't change." "Maybe not," he allowed. "But out here, a woman laying hands on raw wood to make a home, that counts for something the clerk's never seen." He steadied the next beam while she drilled pilot holes. The baby rolled low and heavy inside her, pressing her spine. "I shouldn't let him be kind. Kindness is where it all goes wrong." "Don't mistake this for anything but work, Mr. Lawson," she said. "You and me, we're just hammer and nail. When the roof's on, you ride home. That's the whole of it." He looked up at the rafters, at the sky beyond them, already bruising toward evening. "We'll see what the Lord and the weather have to say about that," he murmured. And for the first time since she'd set her first stake in this frozen ground, May realized she wasn't the only one the storm was pushing toward a choice. Snow thickened toward dusk, the kind that hushed the world and made every sound feel like it traveled farther than it should. May worked the last of the nails into place, shoulders trembling from the day's strain, breath fogging in slow, ragged pulls. Rhett had just set another beam against the wall frame when the wind shoved hard enough to rattle the whole structure. "That storm's not waiting for permission," he said, steadying the beam with one hand and brushing snow from his coat with the other. May didn't answer. She drove the next nail with too much force. Metal bent sideways, her jaw clenched. She yanked it out, tossed it into the snow. Inside the cabin, firelight pressed against thin walls. She ducked in first, more from the cold than any desire for company. Rhett remained on the threshold, shaking snow from his hat before stepping inside just far enough to avoid the wind. He didn't cross the line she'd drawn. His boots stayed planted near the door. The fire guttered once, then caught again. May knelt to feed it, wincing as the cut on her palm reopened. Blood dotted the wood. Rhett saw it. He removed a strip of clean cloth from his coat pocket. Plain, folded tight, carried with the quiet certainty of a man who'd expected he might need it. "Let me," he said. "I can wrap my own hand." "Didn't say you couldn't. Just saying you shouldn't have to." She hesitated only because her pulse stuttered. Then she held out her hand, fast, defiant, as if daring him to make something of it. He didn't. Rhett wound the cloth slow enough not to hurt her, quick enough not to insult her pride. His fingers were warm despite the cold outside, calloused in a way that felt honest. When he tied the knot, May inhaled once, sharply, and looked away. "You do this for every woman building a cabin alone?" she said. "Never met another one who'd try." Snow slapped the shutters. The fire snapped. She rose and crossed to the corner table where she kept her papers, if they could still be called that. A tangle of creased envelopes, a half-filled ledger, a folded legal document with a red seal smeared to one side like a wound. The wind blew again, harder. The lantern flame danced. Rhett stepped forward just enough to keep it from going out. May gathered the papers quickly, but not fast enough. One sheet slid free, fluttering toward Rhett's boot. He picked it up before she could stop him. His jaw tightened as he scanned the first few lines. Not much was needed. The heading told the story. Petition for dissolution of marriage, incomplete. "That's not yours to read," May said, snatching it back. "You left it where the wind could take it." She stuffed the sheet into the stack, breath hitching. "It doesn't matter. It's old. It's useless." "Looks recent enough." "It's nothing," she snapped. "Just paper a man refused to sign." Rhett's gaze didn't waver. "So it's true then. You're still—" "Don't say it." Her voice cracked, though she willed it not to. Not out loud. The storm outside roared. For a moment it felt like the whole wilderness leaned in to hear her shame. May pressed her hand to her stomach, more for steadiness than protection. "He left when I told him about the baby. Walked out before I could finish a sentence. Boston closed its doors behind him, and behind me. But the law—" She swallowed. "The law don't close so easy." "And you thought this cabin could keep it out?" "No," she whispered. "I thought I could outrun it." Rhett looked at the walls, half-finished, gaps stuffed with straw and cloth, logs not yet sealed against winter. Outrunning never built a home. May's breath came sharp. "Don't you preach at me." "I ain't preachin'. Just reckon the truth's already in the room whether we speak it or not." The lantern hissed. For a long stretch, neither spoke. She sank onto the low stool near the fire, elbows on knees, hand covering her face. A single line broke loose before she could catch it. "I am so damn tired of carrying things no one else can see." Rhett didn't move closer, didn't dare, but his voice softened. "Maybe you ain't supposed to carry all of it alone." Her laugh was small, crooked, bitter. "I don't get to lean on anyone, Rhett Lawson. Every time I did, the ground gave way." He rested his hand on the doorframe like a man steadying himself. "If you mean Boston, then say Boston. Don't paint every soul with the same brush." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind keened. May finally looked at him. Not defensive this time, not angry, just unbearably tired. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Truly. Why risk your name, your ranch, your future, for me?" His eyes held hers for the barest second, enough to cut through the cold between them. "I lost someone once." His voice was low, nearly a prayer. "And I was late. I don't aim to be late again." May's breath caught. Just an inch. Just enough to betray her. She stood abruptly, as if motion alone could break the moment, and walked to the wall to check a draft that wasn't there. "Don't," she said. "Don't say things like that. I can't afford to believe them." Rhett put his hat back on, stepped out into the wind, and pulled the door shut behind him. For a moment, the fire dimmed, then surged again, shadows leaping across the logs. May pressed her forehead to the wall, fingers trembling around the cloth he'd wrapped on her hand. "Lord, don't let this be hope," she thought. "Hope's a storm worse than any winter." Outside, Rhett's boots crunched in the snow, slow, deliberate, as if each step was a choice he meant to make again tomorrow. Snowlight fell thin across Willow Creek the next morning, the kind of pale hush that made every whisper carry twice as far. May rode into town with her coat pulled tight. her breath hanging in the air like something she could almost hide behind. She tied her mare outside Klein's general store and stepped in, the bell chiming a note that drew too many eyes for her liking. Conversation dipped, then resumed in a softer key, like folks were switching to a language meant only for corners and half-turned heads. Marta Klein stood behind the counter folding burlap, her smile kinder than most but strained at the edges. Finn stacked canned peaches on a shelf, pretending hard not to look. May set her list down. Flour, nails, tobacco for trade, and salt, if you've got it. Finn cleared his throat. Salt's gone up, 30 cents a sack now. It was 20 last week. He shrugged, gaze fixed on the cans. Freight delays. May reached for her purse, jaw tight. Her fingers brushed the coins, cold as the stairs behind her. Two ranch wives hovered near the dry goods, whispering like sparrows rustling in dead grass. "That's her," one murmured. "The Boston girl. Callahan." "The one carrying someone else's trouble," the other said. "And Lawson's been seen riding that way near every evening. Shameful." May kept her shoulders square, head high, but a single thought cut through her like a blade. Lord, if they could measure sin by whispers, they'd bury me twice. Marta slid the nails across the counter more gently than needed. "Take care on the road, May. Storm's coming. Big one." May nodded, eyes softening for a breath. "I know." But before she could turn, Finn said, too quickly, "Cash only today." Marta shot him a look, sharp as a tack, but the harm was done. May pressed the coins into his palm with a steadiness she didn't feel. "I always pay my debts." She stepped outside, snow crunching under her boots. Her mare snorted at the cold. May swung into the saddle and froze. A carriage she'd never seen before rolled past the smithy, lacquered black, wheels clean despite the mud of town. It moved slow, surveying, as if hunting a property it already owned. Inside, through the frosted glass, sat a woman so poised she seemed carved from winter itself. The carriage didn't stop, didn't need to. May felt it in her gut. Whatever storm was coming, it wasn't only in the sky. By late afternoon, the wind had swung, carrying the sharp scent of pine and something colder, anticipation. May had just hauled a beam to the side of the cabin when she heard it. Wheels crunching over frozen earth. Not a ranch wagon. Too light. Too fine. The carriage rolled into her clearing like it owned the land. The driver hopped down, opened the door, and out stepped the woman behind the frosted glass. Tall, composed. Wrapped in a winter coat the color of cream, her gloves lambskin, her hair pinned in a style no frontier wind dared undo. May, breath steady but pulse wild, set the beam down. "I imagine," the woman said, stepping toward her as though boards and mud should part, "that you are Miss Callahan." May wiped sawdust on her skirt, refusing to shrink. "Depends who's askin'." "Beatrice Langford." Her name entered the air like a cold draft. "I believe you've heard of me." May had. Anyone within 50 miles had. Bankin' family, old money, the kind that didn't rust even under Montana weather. Beatrice's gaze swept the cabin, unfinished walls, tools scattered, the stubborn dignity of a life built by tired hands. Then her eyes returned to May's belly. "This arrangement you have with Mr. Lawson," Beatrice said, voice as smooth as ice, "ends today." May did not flinch. "There ain't no arrangement." "No?" Beatrice stepped closer, snow crunching beneath dainty boots. "His horse is seen on your road daily. He spends hours here. You accept his help." "I accept nothin' I can't repay." Beatrice smiled, not kindly, My fiancé hesitates to set a wedding date. Society whispers. Investors question the stability of the Lawson name. All because he cannot stay away from a woman who, pardon me, is legally still another man's wife. May's spine locked. The cold found its way under her skin. Beatrice opened a leather envelope and produced a folded document. My father's lawyers can resolve your situation, quietly, cleanly. You will receive funds enough to start somewhere far from here, somewhere your past cannot chase Mr. Lawson's future. May's fingers curled into fists. You want me gone? I want what is best for everyone, Beatrice said, especially Rhett. Especially yourself, May thought. The wind picked up, snapping loose curls around her face, but May did not move. I built this place, she said, with my own hands, and I'll leave it only if the ground takes me. Beatrice slipped the papers back into their envelope. Sentiment is charming in small doses, but destructive in large ones. She turned to go, pausing only to add, he will not choose you, not when the cost is everything he owns. The carriage rolled away, its wheels cutting sharp lines in the snow. May stood alone in the clearing long after it vanished, her breath shaking, her baby shifting hard beneath her ribs as if sensing the blow she would not show. Lord, don't let her be right, she whispered. But the wind didn't answer. Only the unfinished walls, thin as hope, heard her prayer. The storm clouds gathered low over Lawson Ridge, heavy as unspoken truth. Rhett rode home with the wind in his face, and Beatrice's quiet venom still clinging to his coat, like scent from a parlor he no longer wished to enter. When he stepped into the ranch house, the lamps were already lit. Amos Lawson sat behind the big oak desk, ledger open, pen still dripping ink. That alone was a warning. The old man didn't leave a pen wet unless something urgent was waiting. Close the door, Amos said without looking up. Rhett obeyed, the latch clicking like judgment. Amos wiped his pen, set it aside, and finally raised his eyes. A Langford carriage passed through town an hour ago. Folks are talking. I reckon I don't need to ask where it was headed. Rhett removed his gloves, slow and deliberate. You reckon right. Amos closed the ledger. Son, you're engaged to that woman. A union between our families secures water rights, grazing borders, bank protection, things this ranch depends on. Rhett set his jaw. I never asked for that engagement. No, Amos said, voice turning flinty. But you accepted it when you shook my hand, and a man's handshake is worth more than his prayers. Rhett met his father's stare, something old and buried rising behind his ribcage. I've prayed for a long time, Pa, just not for the life you planned. A beat passed, faint, dangerous. Amos stood. The desk cast a long shadow between them. I'm hearing things about you riding south each day, helping a woman who's carrying another man's child, a married woman. Rhett's voice dropped. That child got left behind just as she did, and she is married only on paper the law refuses to forget. That's enough. Amos slammed his palm on the desk so hard the ink jar rattled. You think feeling sorry for her is the same as loving her? Rhett breathed once, like a man stepping off a cliff he'd been circling for years. I don't feel sorry for her. I feel what I feel, and I ain't ashamed of it. Silence. Amos walked to the window where the sky bruised darker by the minute. If you break this engagement, Rhett, I'll cut you out of the ranch. You'll have no land, no stock, not a penny of Lawson inheritance. Rhett didn't look away. Then I guess the Lord means for me to start over. Amos turned, stunned. He had expected anger, maybe guilt, not this quiet steadiness, not this peace. Son. Amos's voice cracked like thin ice. Don't do this. Don't throw away a lifetime of work. Rhett reached for his hat. It ain't a life if a man's heart ain't in it. He left before Amos could answer, boots echoing down the long hallway like the toll of a distant bell. And outside, the first flakes of the storm began to fall, soft, then sharper, as if the sky itself was choosing sides. Night crept in early, slipping between the half-built walls of May's cabin. She fed what little wood she had left into the fire, its glow faint and untrustworthy. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling, not from cold, but from the words Beatrice had left behind. He will not choose you. The knock came softly, a rhythm she already knew. Her breath snagged. The door opened before she spoke. Rhett stepped inside, snow on his shoulders, windburn on his cheeks, determination in every line of him. But something else, too. Something stripped down, unarmored. May stiffened. You shouldn't be here. I need to tell you something. His voice was rough, like gravel under ice. I ended the engagement. Her heart lurched so violently she had to grip the table. Rhett? No. My father's cutting me out. Everything. Ranch rights, inheritance, it's gone. He took a step closer, then another. But I'll sleep easier in a cold shack than in a house bought with lies. May backed up until the wall met her spine. Why would you do something so foolish? Because it's true. What's true? That I'd ride through every storm this territory throws just to make sure you and that child see spring. Her breath broke once, just once, before she forced it steady again. You can't say things like that. I ain't taking them back. She shook her head, eyes shining with something too sharp to be gratitude. You don't understand what you're risking. I don't belong to myself, Rhett. Not yet. There's a law that says another man has claim on me. Then we'll fight that law. We. Her voice cracked. You don't get to say we. You just gave up your whole life for something real, he said. For someone I should have fought for years ago. May turned abruptly, rifling through her papers with frantic hands until she found the torn petition, the proof of her ruin. She threw it onto the table. There, she said. Look at it. Look at what I am. A woman running from a marriage she never escaped. A mother whose baby could be taken by the courts. I am not free, Rhett Lawson. And you, her voice faltered. You deserve a life that ain't built on scandal and charity. He stepped closer, but she held out a shaking hand to stop him. I made up my mind, she whispered. After the baby's born, I'll leave. I'll take the Langford offer. It's better this way. For all of us. The words tasted like blood. She felt her baby shift, reacting to the storm inside her. Rhett's face went still, as if a man could be shot without falling. You'd leave here. Leave everything we've fought for. There is no we. That ain't true. It has to be, she said, before you lose any more. The fire flickered. Snow hammered the shutters. Rhett looked at her as if memorizing every line, every breath, like a man carving scripture into his heart before the page burned. Then he nodded once, a soldier accepting a blow. If a storm comes, he said quietly, don't try to run. I'll come back for you, no matter what you believe, no matter how dark it gets. May closed her eyes as the door shut behind him, leaving her alone with the wind and the truth she'd never prayed to face. Lord, forgive me, she thought. I just broke the only man who ever stayed. Outside, Rhett's footsteps faded into the rising storm. Slow, steady, choosing her even as she pushed him away. The storm arrived before midnight, not with thunder or warning, but with a quiet, merciless certainty. Snow falling so thick it erased the world one breath at a time. May bolted the cabin door against the wind, though the latch shook like it had doubts of its own. A sharp pain cinched her belly, low and deep. Not yet, she thought. Please, Lord. Not tonight. But the next wave came harder, then another. She steadied herself against the table, jaw locked, her breath turning sharp enough to cut. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines, wild, directionless, like a creature hunting. She managed to lay blankets near the fire, hands trembling as she boiled water, fumbling the kettle twice before it settled on the iron trivet. Another pain tore through her, and she dropped to her knees with a muffled cry. I ain't ready. I ain't ready to do this alone. The cabin groaned under the weight of the storm. Shutters slammed. A board rattled loose in the rafters. May crawled toward the fallen plank and braced it back into place with her shoulder, still gripping her belly with her free hand. Not you too, she whispered to the wall. Don't you fall on us now? Another contraction drove her to the floor. She bit into the wool blanket to stifle the sound. No one was coming. Not tonight. Not through that storm. A moment later, a softer thought cracked through the fear. Rhett, if you're out there, God carry you. The next hour blurred into agony and prayer. She moved as the body commanded, not as fear permitted, panting, pushing, gripping the leg of the table until the grain bit into her skin. Snow forced its way through a crack near the door, drifting like ash across the floorboards. May crawled to stuff rags into the seam, her breath uneven, her vision swimming. Another pain, deeper than the others, twisted through her, and she screamed this time, no strength left to hold it back. The fire wavered, shadows slipping across the walls like ghosts witnessing her breaking. And then, between one ragged breath and the next, a thin cry, high, sharp, alive. May gathered the tiny, slick body with shaking hands, tears blurring her sight. She wrapped the baby in the wool blanket Rhett had left weeks ago and held him to her chest. Jesse, she whispered, my sweet boy, Mama's here. The storm didn't ease. It only grew wilder, as if the sky rejoiced or raged. She couldn't tell which. But Jesse's cries filled the cabin, drowning out the wind, anchoring her to something fierce and holy. She kissed his forehead, tasting salt and soot. We're all right, she whispered. Even if it's just us, we're all right. But beneath the words trembled a terror she could not hush. Where are you, Rhett? Lord, where is he? Miles away, Rhett urged his horse through a world that had turned white and senseless. Snow beat against his face, needling his skin raw. His coat soaked through minutes after he'd left Boone's parsonage with medicine and blankets stuffed in his saddlebag. If the storm hits early, she's going to need help, he'd told the Reverend. Now the storm had found him instead. The mare stumbled. Rhett leaned low, whispering to her, but the wind drowned every sound. Ice glazed the rocks beneath them. Suddenly the horse slipped, legs skidding sideways, and Rhett was flung hard into a drift, the world turning end over end in a blur of white and pain. He hit the frozen creek bed with a crack that stole his breath. For a second, maybe longer, he couldn't move. He tasted blood, felt it warm on his lip even as the cold seeped deep into his bones. The mare had bolted, reins whipping behind her. Rhett pressed a hand to the ground and forced himself upright. "She needs me," he rasped. "Lord, don't let me be too late again." He staggered forward, leaning on a broken branch he'd grabbed without thinking. Each step sank thigh-deep, each breath tore his ribs. Snow clung to his lashes until he could barely see. The wind howled around him, a lonely, merciless hymn. He kept walking. A man can quit many things in life, but he cannot quit the place his heart has chosen. Hours blurred. His hands went numb first, then his feet, then nearly everything, save the one stubborn thought. May's alone. The baby's coming. Keep walking. When the outline of the cabin finally surfaced through the white, faint, wavering like a distant star, Rhett nearly collapsed from the sight. The wind shoved him sideways. He scraped along the wall, using the logs as a guide, each breath a prayer ripped from his chest. He reached the door, lifted his fist, knocked once, twice. The door cracked open, and the warmth nearly blinded him. May stood there, hair damp with sweat, Jessie swaddled in her arms, her face pale and terrified and fierce all at once. "Rhett?" He stumbled inside and dropped to his knees by the fire. Steam rose from his coat. Blood darkened the fabric at his shoulder. He looked up, saw the child, and for the first time since the day his wife died, something in him broke open in a way that didn't threaten to kill him. You built a family without waiting on me," he whispered, voice shredded. "Mind if I help with the next few boards?" May's breath caught. She held Jessie closer, as if the world had tilted into place at last. "Don't pick him up," she whispered. "If you plan on leaving come sunrise." Rhett's hand trembled as he reached toward them, not as a rescuer, but as a man asking permission to belong. "I gave up everything else," he murmured. "Only thing I want to keep now is the two of you." And for the first time since the winter began, the storm outside felt small. Winter loosened its grip slow, as if reluctant to release the small cabin that had survived its worst night. The drifts shrank, the pines brightened, and the frozen earth began to soften under Rhett's boots. Every thawing day felt like a promise the Lord whispered gently through the branches. Rhett rose earlier than the sun now, stepping outside with a hammer tucked through his belt, breath steaming in the cool dawn. His shoulder was still stiff from the fall, but he worked through it, quietly, steadily, squaring new beams for an expanded wall. Inside, May stirred at the sound of him. Jessie fussed once, then settled when she lifted him to her chest. She pushed the door open a crack, letting a blade of morning light spill across the floor. "You're starting awful early," she said. "Cabin's too small for a growing boy," Rhett replied without looking back. He drove a stake into the softening ground, the thud steady, certain. And for his mama. May stepped out onto the small porch, still crooked, still waiting for Rhett to set it right. A thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hair braided down her back. Jessie's fists peeked from the blanket, curious at every sound. "You don't have to do all this," she murmured. "I know." Rhett lifted another beam, fitting it against the first. "But I'd like to." May watched him a moment longer, watched how his breath fogged the same air hers did, how his hands shaped wood like a man building something more than shelter. "I used to think," she whispered, mostly to herself, "that a home was just four walls and a roof." Rhett paused, resting his weight on the beam. "And now?" May held Jessie closer, his small body warm, alive, resting in the space where hope used to hurt. Now I reckon it's whoever's willing to stay when the storm's over. Rhett's jaw moved. Not a smile, not quite, but something eased in his shoulders. By noon, the sun warmed enough for them to sit on the makeshift porch. Rhett spread a wool blanket for May and the baby. She lowered herself carefully, though Jessie protested with a soft cry muffled against her collar. "Here," Rhett said, handing her his canteen. "You need more water." May accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." Two simple words, spoken soft, but they carried weight enough to steady a man's heart. As Jessie drifted into sleep, May pulled out a small bundle from beneath her blanket, a letter she had written the night before. The envelope was blue, the edges worn, the ink smudged once where her hand had trembled. Rhett noticed immediately. His voice gentled. "Is that my letter to Boston?" she said. She didn't need to explain further. He didn't reach for it, didn't ask to read it. He simply waited, still as a prayer. May breathed in the thin spring air. "I'm asking them to finish the divorce. Not for you, not anymore, but because I'm tired of living like I owe that man my life." Rhett nodded, quiet. "You don't owe him a thing." May looked away, blinking at the field of melting snow. "I know that now. Took me longer than it should have." Reverend Boone arrived later that afternoon, riding a mule too stubborn to mind the mud. His coat flapped in the breeze as he dismounted, boots sinking slightly in the thawing earth. "Afternoon, Miss Callahan," he greeted. "And little Jessie, and Mr. Lawson. Seems the good Lord gave you enough strength left to lift a hammer." "Barely," Rhett muttered. May handed Boone the envelope. Her hand lingered a breath longer than necessary before she let it go. "Can you send it with the next mail coach?" Boone examined the seal, then her face, quietly, respectfully. "This one carries weight, I reckon." "It does," she admitted. "It's the last tie I've got to a life I shouldn't have stayed in." Boone's gaze softened. "Then let's see it undone proper." He tucked the letter away, tipped his hat, and rode off, leaving the three of them in the hush that comes when something heavy finally lifts. May exhaled, a slow, careful release, almost a prayer. Rhett leaned against the half-finished post, hands resting on his belt. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" May looked up, sunlight catching the fine lines of worry etched at his eyes. "It does." "What changed?" he asked. She glanced down at Jessie, then at Rhett. "I stopped running from something and started running toward something else." His throat tightened, not that he'd named the feeling aloud. May smiled, small but real. "Don't look at me like that, Rhett Lawson. I ain't proposing." He huffed, almost a laugh. "Didn't figure you were. I'm just saying, if we're going to build something here, it's got to start honest." Rhett tapped the new beam behind him. "Honest seems like a good foundation." For the first time since winter broke, the wind passed soft through the clearing, gentle enough to feel like blessing. May shifted Jessie so his tiny fingers peeked out of the blanket. "Look there," she whispered. "He's reaching for the light." Rhett watched the baby, watched how instinctively he leaned toward warmth. "Smart boy," he murmured. May smiled again, tired and tender. "He gets that from, well, maybe both of us." The afternoon settled warm around them, soft with early spring and the quiet certainty that something had shifted, not just in the land, but in the space between three lives learning how to fit together. And somewhere far behind the mountains, a letter carried the last of May's old life toward its rightful end. The future, for once, felt wider than the horizon. Spring settled slow over the clearing, softening the ground and washing the valley in new color. Mud clung to boots, birds returned to the pines, and the air carried the scent of thawed earth, the kind of smell that made a person believe God hadn't forgotten this little corner of Montana after all. Rhett hammered the final board of the new porch, stepped back, and wiped sweat from his brow. The roof still needed pitch, the railing still crooked, but the cabin looked less like a place someone survived, and more like a place someone might stay. May stepped out with Jessie on her hip, the baby bundled in a thin blanket Marta Klein had knit, warm, cheerful, uneven at the edges. Jessie blinked at the sunlight as if seeing it for the first time. "Looks sturdy," May said, nodding at the porch. Rhett shrugged lightly. "It'll hold, long as you don't dance a jig up here." She smirked, small, but enough to knock the breath from a man who didn't know how to ask for joy outright. A wagon rolled into view then, Klein's bay mare pulling it slow up the rise. Marta waved, while Finn held a pot covered with a towel that steamed at the corners. "Thought you could use supper you didn't have to cook," Marta called. May's face brightened. "Come in. The place ain't much, but you're welcome." Finn chuckled. "Well, if Lawson's the one building it, we ain't expectin' the Ritz." Rhett lifted an eyebrow, but he let the jab stand. It felt good to hear laughter where winter had once held only silence. Inside, the cabin glowed warm. The fire crackled steady, Jessie's soft coos drifting between the low murmur of conversation. Marta set the stew on the table while Finn handed Rhett a tin cup. "Water?" Finn said. "Didn't figure you needed whiskey while you're still mendin'." Rhett smirked. "Didn't figure you'd pass up an excuse to hand me whiskey." May laid Jessie in the cradle, a simple wooden structure Rhett had carved in the weeks after the storm. Jessie curled his tiny fist around the railing as if claiming it. "Supper's ready," May said. They gathered around the rough-hewn table. Marta insisted on saying grace, her voice warm as rising bread. "Lord, we thank you for provisions, for spring, and for the hands that built this roof. And we thank you," she glanced at May and Jessie, "for new beginnings." "Amen," they echoed. Through the simple clatter of tin spoons, through easy talk of weather and fence repairs, something shifted, small, gentle, but sure. For the first time, May didn't feel like a trespasser in her own home, and Rhett didn't feel like a stranger visiting someone else's life. After supper, the Kleins loaded their wagon. Marta hugged May tight, whispering, "You're doing just fine, sweetheart." Finn clapped Rhett on the back and muttered, "Reckon you got more than you bargained for." When they were gone, twilight draped itself across the clearing. May stepped onto the porch with Jessie, rocking him against her shoulder. Rhett leaned on the railing beside her, shoulders relaxed, looser than she'd ever seen them. "He's sleeping easier these days," Rhett said softly. May nodded. "Feels like the house breathes better now, like the walls finally know they're meant to hold more than just me." Rhett's gaze drifted toward the valley, the faint glow of Lawson Ranch burning steady in the distance. "Pa won't come around," he said quietly. "Not soon. Maybe not ever." May didn't look away from the lights. "You reckon that bothers you?" He hesitated. "It used to, but I figure a man chooses where he plants his roots." He tapped the porch beneath him. "And mine seem to keep growing here." May's breath caught, not in fear this time, but in the kind of ache that came from hope trying to bloom where sorrow once lived. She shifted Jessie into Rhett's waiting arms. "Here," she said. "You hold him. My arms are tired." Rhett took the baby carefully, like Jessie was something fragile and holy. The child squirmed once, then nestled against his chest. "He fits there," May murmured. Rhett's voice went low. "Feels like he's always belonged here." May brushed a stray curl from her cheek. "Rhett Lawson, I ain't promising rings or vows or anything I can't stand by. Not yet." He turned toward her, waiting, steady, patient, the way only a man who'd walked through a storm for someone could wait. "But if you're still here when the next winter comes," her voice thinned, honest as bare wood, "then maybe we can call this porch ours, call this house ours, call this boy ours." Rhett swallowed, the answer breaking through him like sunrise. "May, you don't know what that means to me." "I do," she said softly. "That's why I'm saying it slow." They stood side by side as night settled deeper, Jessie warm against Rhett's chest, May leaning just close enough that their shoulders brushed. No ring, no preacher, no promise carved in stone. Just a cabin built from storms, a porch wide enough for three, and roots pushing down into thawed earth. Quiet, stubborn, certain. And sometimes, in the Wild West, that was the holiest kind of family the Lord ever allowed.